On September 30th, 2014, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor was released. Almost 2.5 million people bought the game brand new, and it released to fairly great reviews, scoring an 84 on Metacritic. Fans were loving the game with its creative new enemy NPC system that was going to revolutionize video games. Or it would have, if not for the fact that it was copyrighted by Warner Brothers, the parent company of Monolith Productions, who had made the game. I remember reading about the game in one of my issues of Game Informer, and at the time I didn't have the pleasure of playing, as I was not allowed to play rated M for mature games. 2 years later, however, I would receive the game for Christmas, and I played through the game and loved every second of it. The intro to the game is you playing as Talion, a captain of the Rangers from Gondor, serving on the top of the Black Gate of Mordor. The game very cleverly introduces you to stealth mechanics by sneaking up on your wife and attacking her with a bouquet of flowers. You're taught basic sword combat by sparring with your son and flashing forward to fighting orcs that overrun the Black Gate. The Black Hand of Sauron kills your family in front of you in an attempt to summon the Elfwraith Celebrimbor to bind with him, but in the process, Celebrimbor binds with the dying captain, Talion. Now, Celebrimbor provides you with a plethora of supernatural skills, the most important being that whenever you die, you'll now respawn at the nearest point of interest. It was the first time in my life I had ever experienced a game where instead of dying being something where you have to reload a save that might be from over an hour ago, you just get minorly set back, which is one of my favorite things that stands apart from any other video game in my head. Another of your newfound Wraith abilities is to interrogate an enemy. You place your hand on the worm enemy, which is an orc with knowledge of the captains in the area. Each map consisting of around 20 orcs and 5 war chiefs. Captains are tougher enemies that have special traits to them. Enemy captains will have weaknesses, fears, strengths, and special abilities. After you've interrogated a worm, you'll learn a captain's fears and weaknesses if they have any. You will use this loop finding out who is in charge and work your way up the chain of command until you find all the top lieutenants for Sauron and kill them all. There are some various side missions that go along with Talion's main goal. Combat in Shadow of Mordor is very similar to the Batman Arkham games. You mash the attack button to swing your sword and hit enemies until they die. Also, while you're hitting your enemy, you build up your might and combo meters. The higher your combo meter, the more damage you do per strike. Once your might is full, you'll have a few options of abilities to unleash on your foes that I will go over later when integrating them into the new game we are making. Alongside with combat, stealth is a massive part of the gameplay that makes Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War so special. You can hold down the right trigger to make Talion crouch down and enter stealth mode. This makes Talion silent, allowing you to sneak up on enemy for stealth kills, which allows you to quickly dispatch orcs with immediacy. 2 more options will unlock later into the game. First being a brutalized kill that will scare orcs that witness the kill and build your might and combo meters. The second is a stealth drain that immediately drains orcs of their health and replenishes your own. Once you progress far enough into the game, you will learn the ability to dominate orcs. This is a replacement for your drain ability. So instead of popping an orc's head afterwards, that orc is now under your influence. You cannot directly control their actions, but they will go fight any other orcs they see. Finishing the game requires you to amass a small army to attack the Black Hand of Sauron and take him down. Talion's next adventure would be told in the phenomenal sequel Shadow of War, with an improvement on everything from the first game. Combat felt snappier and weightier, along with an addition of new abilities and an expansion on the Nemesis System. The only thing I didn't feel was improved on was the story. Shadow of Mordor is full of emotion and a story of revenge for a lost family. Shadow of War is more concerned about the idea of keeping evil at bay, which, considering, isn't even that bad of an idea. The story really just serves as a way to introduce you to your wealth of powers and upgrades for those powers. The first major improvement is an addition of a second jump that helps speed up and smooth out the movement tech of the game. There's a heavier emphasis on raising an army to take over the region as you play through. In Shadow of Mordor, the recruiting was more heavily emphasized at the end of the game. It is the main focus of Shadow of War, hence why it is called Shadow of War. You recruit captains to assault the stronghold of the region. A stronghold consists of an overlord which is an orc captain that is stronger than most of the other captains in the region. Then under the Overlord are between 2 and 6 war chiefs that guard the stronghold. Before you start a mission to infiltrate the stronghold, you can choose to eliminate the war chiefs in special missions. You may also insert your own captains as war chief spies. This will make the assault mission much easier. To assault a stronghold, you choose a few captains to take with you into the attack. For each captain you bring, there is an option for attack upgrades that will make your siege easier. Once the assault starts, you rush to capture points. After the points have been captured, the main door to the interior of the base will open. This allows you to take on the Overlord in one-on-one combat to take over the stronghold. This cycle of going into a new area, recruiting captains, injecting spies, and taking over the region's base are the main gameplay loop for Shadow of War. Now that we have an understanding of the mechanics we're going to use, let's look at the lore of the Elder Scrolls. And we'll start at the beginning. The Elder Scrolls is an illustrious series of video games developed by Bethesda Game Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks. I won't speak much to the early games in the series since I know little of them and don't really pertain much to the story I'm wishing to tell. For those that have been living under a rock for the past 20 years, The Elder Scrolls is a series of fantasy role-playing games including Arena, Daggerfall, Battlespire, Adventures Redguard, Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, The Elder Scrolls Online, commonly known as ESO, and Blades. Most of the main canon is derived from the later games, such as Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. It also seems to be that the community is willing to retcon anything from ESO, as it sometimes has to take liberties with the lore to retain gameplay aspects. Now, let's actually talk about it. Here are some very basic concepts about the Elder Scrolls. So at creation, Lorcan tricked some of the gods, more commonly referred to as the Aedra, into using their powers to make the world referred to as Mundus. The Aedra lost their physical forms and basically only exist as concepts, but are still very, very real. The gods who were not part of creation, the Daedra, kept all of their powers and retreated into their own realm, known as Oblivion. Different Daedra have their own pockets of Oblivion. Tamriel is the name of the continent where all of the Elder Scrolls games take place, to my knowledge. It is home to multiple countries, as of right now, consisting of Hammerfell, High Rock, Somerset Isles, Valenwood, Skyrim, Blackmarsh, Elsewhere, Morrowind, and Cyrodiil. The playable races of the Elder Scrolls include the Altmer, or High Elves, the Argonians, which are lizard folk, the Bosmer, or Wood Elves, Bretons, which are half-elf, half-human, the Dunmer, or Dark Elves, the Imperials, which are the humans, Khajiit, the Cat People, Nords, which are Norse humans, the Orsimer, which are orcs, and the Redguards, which are humans that have inspiration from what seems to be North Africa or the Middle East. Now that you know the story of Talion the Ranger and have a basic understanding of the Elder Scrolls, let's dive into our game. In Shadow of War, you're bound to a wraith that allows you to not truly die. You could try to do the same thing in the Elder Scrolls, but I'm not aware of any paranormal possessions that take place. In my opinion, the easiest and maybe most lore-accurate way to do the thing would be to give our player character an artifact of the long-forgotten Daedra, and the artifact for this game would be an amulet. This way, it can differentiate from the Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War games, in which rings are used heavily, so we'll give our player character a necklace. And we can learn more about the Daedra attached to this amulet as we progress through the game. Now that we have an undying mechanic, we should get some kind of story going. Most of the Elder Scrolls games start out with you as a prisoner, so we can start off much like Skyrim, being transported on a wagon at night across a road with heavy trees. In the distance, you see the front of the caravan lights go out with screams of horror. The guards panic and abandon the convoy. You decide to flee to a cave that you saw while you were being dragged across the road, and as soon as you think you've made it, there's an explosion and you're suddenly knocked unconscious, flying deep into this cave. When you come to, you realize you're no longer in the same cave, but at the entrance of a crudely built temple out of roughly hewn rock. You enter and see a stake with a swirling pendant of violet ethereal light. You put on the amulet and hear a voice whisper, "Finally, I shall have my vengeance, as you fall unconscious again. You awaken to the feeling of being in a wagon again. As you wake up more, you realize that you're in a coffin. So you start screaming and pounding on the coffin, and the wagon comes to a stop, and you hear a bunch of hushed tones. Your coffin's pried open, and the priests of Arche hauling you look terrified. They yada yada about you being dead, and take you back to the city of Evermore. And the priests leave, and as their wagon is being pulled away, you see what's responsible for destroying your original prisoner caravan. It's a group of soldiers from Hammerfell. They kill you and burn the city of Evermore to the ground, sparing no person or building. And after you awaken again, it becomes your mission to avenge Evermore and the innocent people that tried to take you in, as well as the priests that brought you back from that cave. On our quest for vengeance, we'll need to start building an army. To keep in line with the Elder Scrolls magic, you can have the branding mechanic be similar to partially soul trapping someone. I personally would like to have it be more of a recruiting mechanic. It spices up the gameplay so it's not as similar to the Shadow games. The way it works in Shadow of War is you fight a captain until they're low on health or broken, using your Wraith powers to take control of the enemy's mind, brand them, and make them fight for you. With recruiting, it would be similar. You still fight enemy captains until they're low on health. Then you can either keep fighting them to kill them or initiate a grab mechanic where you knock the enemy to their knees with your weapon pointed at them and have them swear allegiance to you. I would like there to be just a slight resource management aspect. I know it probably is appealing to a very small portion of the audience that plays these games, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments. It should be very minimal, just adding something to differentiate it more from the other Shadow games. I'm not trying to make this become a management sim. The easiest thing I think would be for captains to have small fees. The more elite a captain is, the better ratio of positive to negative perks, the more you have to pay them. You can also grow close to some of these captains and no longer have to pay them because they serve you out of loyalty. In my head, there's two different ways that this game could take place. Either you're in the land of High Rock and the region is split up into multiple smaller sections with cities to take over. The second being similar to the way that the Elder Scrolls Online is structured, with Tamriel split into 3 distinct factions. The factions would be the Aldmeri Dominion, the Rebel Nations, and the Empire. The Aldmeri Dominion would consist of the Somerset Isle, Elsewhere, and Valenwood. The countries of the Rebel Nations would be Skyrim, Hammerfell, and High Rock. This leaves Cyrodiil and Morrowind to make up the Empire. I'm not including Blackmarsh because they notoriously do their own thing. While this leaves the Empire at the weakest faction numerically, this is a lore-friendly way to split them up post a Skyrim Civil War world. The mechanic of having roaming knights similar to orcs would work really well in High Rock, where there is already a fractured political system that would fit well into conquering multiple castles and cities to bring together the entire country. The country would be split into multiple regions, each with a capital that you can take over, similar to sieges in Shadow of War. After capturing Evermore from the Hammerfell soldiers, you would meet the ruler of High Rock, who asks you to meet him at his castle in Daggerfall, the capital of High Rock. After dinner with the ruler, 3 assassins break in and slaughter the dinner party, including the ruler's wife, children, guards, and guests. Then the assassins hold you in place while the ruler walks over to you and says, "I have been looking for a way to rid myself of these pacifists and for a way to go to war against Hammerfell for years. Here along comes a hero that happens to be a Hammerfell spy, kills my beloved family and guard after winning the trust of my people, and after taking some horseshit-filled sad excuse of a city. An easy target to make all the blame fuel a rage in the people for a war." The king then stabs you before letting you bleed out on the floor, and for dramatic effect, he also kills the assassins. After this incident, you wake up, make your way back to Evermore, and on your way back through the region, you begin to recruit new knights to your cause, and learn most of them are old veterans from the High Rock Civil War. They wanted to fight against the current ruler and his oppressive regime. The veterans failed because one of the regiments meant to take part in the siege at Wayrest never showed up. There's a rumor that the regiment's camp was destroyed in the night by an undead legion. But Danielle, one of the leaders of the group, looks at you and says, "He doesn't no mind." Eventually, you take back Evermore and start campaigning to take over more of High Rock. You find that most of the knights in the area care more for glory than for loyalty to the ruler. Some have a fierce reverence for the ruler, but they are few and far between. From there, the story unfolds as you go from region to region, taking more capitals from the clutches of the ruler. Now that the stage is set, let's bring some of the mechanics over to our new game. Lots of the mechanics in the games can be easily replaced in the Elder Scrolls. Basic combat will be super easy. All the weapons Talion uses are readily available in the Elder Scrolls. Talion has a sword, a broken sword he basically uses as a knife, a ranged weapon, typically a bow, and a glaive. Swords, knives, and bows already exist in the Elder Scrolls, and glaives are very similar to spears, which also exist, which makes standard combat easy to replicate. Skills will be a little more difficult to adapt, although not too difficult. Let's take a look at the skills that Talion possesses throughout the game. We have our main combat skills, which include Execution, which is an immediate kill, the Perfect Counter, which is a kill on a perfect counter, Critical Strike, which does higher damage per hit, a Ground Finisher, which is a faster ground finisher, Brutal Aggression, it's an execution that causes fear, Retaliation, which is a counter on a death blow. These are super easily implemented into our new game. They're just basic combat skills. Moving on to the main predator skills, we have Elven Agility, which is a sprint, Brutalize, which is a stealth kill that causes fear, Poison Tendril allows you to poison barrels of grog, Wraith Chain allows you to chain stealth kills, Deadly Spectre leaves behind a wraith to commit a stealth kill, Death Threat, which gives you better loot after killing a captain. Most of these will be easily implemented besides Deadly Spectre and Wraith Chain. For Deadly Spectre, I would suggest getting rid of the ability. I never really used it. If someone else has a way to implement it, they're more than welcome to comment down below. As for Wraith Chain, I think it would be easy to just give our new amulet minor time manipulation powers. That way we can just chain through a bunch of kills really quickly. And on to the range skills, we have Detonate, which teleports you to a fire and explodes it, which this one I think would be the most difficult to adapt besides any of its subcategories it possesses in Shadow of War that just allows you to detonate it from afar. Freeze Pin allows you to freeze an enemy in place. Ice Magic already exists in the Elder Scrolls, so we can easily apply it to that. Bird of Prey, Focus depletes slower while in the air, which is another time manipulation thing, which we can attribute to the amulet. Mighty Shot is a powerful shot that causes a small explosion. Fire Magic already exists, making that very easy. Shadow Strike lets you teleport for an instant kill. Instead of it being an instant teleport, you can shoot a special crossbow attached to a Dwemer artifact that acts similarly to Batman's grapple hook. Shadow Strike is already a very overpowered ability, allowing you to teleport stupidly far very quickly. A nerf wouldn't be too bad. Your Wraith abilities include Brace of Daggers, which allows you to throw small daggers repeatedly. Small daggers already exist in the Elder Scrolls. Elven Light lets you punch the ground and stun enemies. Lightning Magic can be used for the same effect. Ice Storm is a punch that freezes enemies. Again, Ice Magic already exists. Consume is a drain enemy life mid-combat. Absorb Life is a pretty common spell in the Elder Scrolls. Treasure Hunter automatically lets you collect drop loot, and I would like that to just be standard from the game and not an ability you have to unlock. I would remove mounted combat abilities along with most of the mount variety. There should definitely be mounts and even summonable mounts. I just feel this aspect of gameplay was there just because they could throw it in and it wasn't super fleshed out. In our game, we would remove most of that except for the idea that you can fight while mounted. I would actually like the character to start out with a mount that can't perform its own combat, like a horse. Later in the game, you could unlock a mount like a dire wolf or something of the like. Our story skills include Consume, which drains life from orcs. Again, Absorb Life is a spell found commonly in the Elder Scrolls. Spectral Glaive, we can replace that with a Dwemer Spear that extends from a small rod. Elven Rage allows you to slow time and unleash a flurry of attacks. Again, this can be tied to our time manipulating amulet. Shadow Strider lets you double jump, and this is the one I'm having the most struggle with. I can't think of an in-lore reason that lets you double jump. And then one of our most important abilities will be the ability to dominate a captain. After a captain's been brought to low health, there are normally 3 options. In Shadow of War, you can either recruit, shame, or continue fighting. In our game, I would like to replace shame with imprison, so that after a knight has been brought to his knees with a weapon at their throat, they're given the option. In Shadow of War, it was possible to find an orc that will have the Iron Will perk, which means you will have to shame an orc until it loses that trait. This is something that I think would carry over well into this game, but unlike the Iron Will perk, it would be called Fiercely Loyal, and they could only lose it after being imprisoned for a certain amount of time without their liege trying to pay their ransom. And now, let's dive into the plot. There will be 2 main storylines throughout the game, the first being you liberating High Rock from the oppressive regime that's ruling over. Once you pick back up from your encampment after being betrayed by the king, your goal will be to take out the remaining cities in High Rock to weaken the king's hold on his territory. The regions will be broken down by their major cities, so we'll have Daggerfall, Camlorn, Shornhelm, North Point, Evermore, Wayrest, Faerun, and Johanna. Once you liberate Evermore for a second time, it will be up to you to amass an army to take on the king. When you're freshly liberated, you realize that Daggerfall and the surrounding cities are too dangerous to take on straight away, so you'll need to take on the regions farthest and least controlled by Daggerfall. While taking land back from the king, you'll be going on missions with some of the resistance leaders to help you sabotage the city's defenses, being able to put spies in the stronghold. While fun and rewarding in Shadow of War, makes sieges way too easy. Instead, there will be a limited amount of sabotage missions you can undertake to weaken a city's defenses. The first 2 cities would have scripted missions with the resistance leaders. There will be 3 total leaders I'd like to put a focus on. The first being Lebathor, a Breton. He's a descendant from a long line of merchants that have expanded throughout Tamriel. He's the main source of income for the resistance before you arrived. He does express his doubts in your abilities to lead the resistance. He mentions that going back to the king maybe isn't such a bad idea. He's a character that you feel like your army needs, but could betray you at any moment and wouldn't feel out of place. He's handy with a knife at close quarters. Then we have Danielle, who's also a Breton. She's a warrior priestess of Stendar, leads the armies when you aren't there. Her father was one of the guests that was killed at the party you attended. She's personable, but not bubbly and annoying. She's a strong warrior that used to be a captain of the guard at Wayrest. Bartholomew, another Breton, a mercenary archer looking for his next big adventure. He's a tactical leader and helps organize raids and sabotage missions. Very laid back, doesn't care much for the politics, just looking for a good time. He envies your ability to not truly die, as you will be able to experience adventure and adventure and adventure over and over again. He is followed by an orc companion named Korlaz Grodub Ghoul. He's an orc berserker, basically Bartholomew's pack mule, and he at some point expresses interest in retaking Orsinium. The player will be able to take over Faerun first, as it is one of the smaller cities compared to the rest I've mentioned. This will also cut off Johanna from the rest of High Rock by land, and give the resistance a port on the Sea of Ghosts. Bartholomew will set up a sabotage mission in the area to help weaken the city's defenses. Now let's talk about the different types of sabotage missions. We'll have the reduced troop type, which leads me into our troop equivalents from the Shadow of War games. I don't really have a concrete way to implement the tribe aspect from Shadow of War, except for giving knights certain abilities based on their race to supplement the tribal factions from Shadow of War. If anyone has any other ideas, feel free to reach out in the comments. But this leads me into the different troop types we'll have. In Shadow of War, the troop types were archers, defenders, savages, hunters, ologs, and warriors. In this game, we'll replace savages with berserkers, hunters with mages, and ologs with ogres. Going back to the sabotage aspect, the different types of troop reduction missions will be demolish guard towers, which removes archers, burn barracks, which removes defenders, poison feast, which removes berserkers, arcane trap, which removes mages, prison break, which removes ogres, and pilfer weaponry, which removes warriors. The next type of sabotage mission will be to weaken defenses. There will be unstable, which creates an opening in the walls, stone rain delay, which disarms catapults, invitation, which is a destruction of the front gate. The next type of mission will be help from the inside, which also has 3 subcategories. The first being a warriors, mages, or thieves guild infiltration, where members of their respective organization go into the city the day before the siege and give you 1 free capture point. Tavern brawl, have a large fight break out the night before that eliminates 1 capture point from the city. And revolution, which convinces the townspeople to revolt and eliminate 1 capture point from the city. Not every sabotage mission will be available at every city. For instance, Faerun is a smaller city and won't have the option for help from the inside or weakened defenses. Therefore, you'll only be able to do 1 type of sabotage mission as it is a smaller city. The amount and type of sabotage missions available will increase as the city size increases. Throughout the story, your conquered cities will be attacked by increasingly more difficult sieges. It will be possible to lose them and have to work to retake them. You'll take over the cities in the order of Evermore, Faerun, Jehanna, Shornhelm, Northpoint, Wayrest, Camlorn, and Daggerfall. While performing a mandatory sabotage mission before attacking Shornhelm, Danielle will betray you, Lebethor, and Bartholomew as you're sneaking through the city. She attempts to kill Bartholomew, but Lebethor tries to get between the two and ends up taking the fatal blow. You were separated from the group prior to this event, and Danielle reveals your position to the army in Shornhelm. After finding Bartholomew and escaping the city, you'll both come to learn that Danielle had wanted the king to attack Hammerfell for a long time. Danielle had a thirst for war and conquering. She thought she could satiate it by joining the rebellion, but soon realized that there would be no need for warriors after peace was brought back to High Rock. So she struck a deal to become the leader of the king's army if she defected from the rebellion and led them into a trap. Once you get to Daggerfall, you will find Danielle in the castle where the king resides. After a lengthy monologue from Danielle, you'll slay her, and as she lays bloody on the floor, trying to crawl towards the king, he will push her aside with his foot and a look of disgust. Then you will fight the king for the chance to retake High Rock. Now you'll slay the king and reunite the land. This will wrap up the first part of the main story in High Rock, and now you'll control the land. The other storyline being woven throughout concerns the Daedric prince that owns the amulet you found at the beginning of the game. Once the king kills you and his family, you will enter a dreamlike sequence in which you are visited by your patron deity, Zemustia. Zemustia is the Daedric prince of revenge and justice. His version of justice is swift and not confined to the law. Some would call it unjust and brutal. Following the incident in Shornhelm, where Danielle betrays your group, Zemustia pushes you to kill Bartholomew for not being able to stop Danielle. Bartholomew failed, and his failure led to the death of Lebethor and the escape of Danielle. He needs to be punished. After liberating Shornhelm and visiting your home base in Evermore, you will run into a priestess of Stendar that talks to you about the path you are following with Zemustia. She shows you the ramifications of your actions if you continue on with Zemustia, and you are presented with the option to either continue what you are doing and kill Bartholomew, or accept the gift of Stendar, which comes with a new necklace of fun game mechanics. The same that we already had, but now you're a good guy. If you choose to get rid of Zemustia, then you later find out he chooses to gift Danielle with a sword that can permanently kill you, even with your Undying Amulet. Now this will wrap up the whole game. This leaves our character at the end of the game, having saved High Rock from the oppressive king, and either continuing to follow Zemustia and his wicked ways, or following Stendar with righteous justice. I do have some ideas for post-game content. The first DLC would revolve around Orsinium and Korlaz Gro-Dub Ghoul and his interest to retake the city. To set some background, the time of this game is going to be shortly after the Skyrim Civil War. During this short time, Orsinium was taken over by an orc named Grob Gro Lugkar, who is tired of his kin and the rest of the races that are looked down upon not taking over more area surrounding them. Grob wants to move south into Hammerfell, where Volendrung was recently been found again. This puts him in an uneasy alliance with the current king of High Rock. Orsinium would be added as a city to take over throughout the game, most likely before Shornhelm. The soldiers of the army in Orsinium would not comprise of any of the common races, except for orcs. So replacing most of the races would be orcs, goblins, ogres, and rikers. For the second DLC, you will receive reports of your cities being attacked by Hammerfell soldiers. You would think this is a ploy by loyalists for the king's men to gain more sympathy to attack Hammerfell. You follow these soldiers all the way back to Dragonstar in Hammerfell, where you learn that they are attacking the High Rock cities on orders of their government. You take over the city of Dragonstar to stop the attacks, but learn there's much more behind the scenes, setting up some excellent sequel bait. And with that, we've totally wrapped up. This has been Middle Tamriel, Shadow of High Rock. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Ideas, critiques, any ideas for future videos. I appreciate you watching this far. And if you can, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.